If you just speak after lunch, you apologize because everybody's eaten and is feeling tired. And if you speak in the afternoon, you apologize because everybody's wanting to go and get drinks. And I've managed to hit the trifecta. I've probably got everybody here jet-lagged, having eaten lunch and tired and wanting to go to get drinks. I work for CrossRef, and CrossRef, for those of you who don't know, is one of those invisible organizations, ideally invisible organizations that Jonathan just talked about. That is, we provide infrastructure that, in the best of circumstances, works, and you don't think too much about it. If you see a DOI, you click on it, it works, and that's fantastic. And my particular job in CrossRef is to ruin all that by introducing new things that might not work and that people might notice because they're not working. I'm the director of strategic initiatives, and that, as I said, basically translates to new stuff. And some of the things that have come out of CrossRef since the initial DOI launch are things that effectively came out of my group. So things like cross-check, fundref, and a lot of people don't realize this, but ORCID actually was a project that originated as a CrossRef project and got spun out. And that also came from the group that I operate at CrossRef. So I'm here to talk to you about a project that we have been working on for a while called the DOI Event Tracker. And one of the things that I've got to point out is that throughout this talk I might abbreviate this because it's kind of a mouthful to DET. And I just want to assure you that I'm not talking about the hallucinogenic drug. We are, after all, in Amsterdam. You might get confused. This is just our abbreviation for the DOI Event Tracker. Now, the DOI Event Tracker originated from just an observation that we kept having at CrossRef, which is that we were constantly surprised to see DOIs being used in contexts we never expected them to be used in. So people got pretty excited, I suppose, when the first DOI was used in a blog, when we started seeing traffic coming from places like Twitter and Facebook and other sort of social media that we hadn't heard of. It became apparent to us that there was a lot going on with DOIs that was going on outside of the scholarly literature. One of the first things that we did way back when I first joined CrossRef was we actually started looking at citations that are deposited in CrossRef. And we started to do something which was to measure the ratio of references that had the ratio of references to the ratio of references that had plain ordinary URIs in them. That is not DOIs. These were pointing to things on the web that didn't have an identifier of any, whether it was an archive identifier or something. And at that time, I think the first real numbers that we started seeing that started really getting our attention were back in 2013, when at the time, I think 1 in 15 citations had a plain ordinary URI in it. That means that somebody was referring to something on the open web. And the rate seemed to be increasing. My guess is that if we did the analysis, and we will do the analysis again soon, that rate would actually probably be about, that number would probably be about 1 in 10. So clearly, and this should be no surprise, to anybody who thinks about it for more than 30 seconds, the scholarly literature does cite stuff that isn't in the scholarly literature. And similarly, the other way around, which is when we look at our refer logs and we see stuff coming in from all sorts of different domains, that is, we see that people are clicking on DOIs in lots of domains that do not belong to our members. This tells us something about the fact that scholarly communication, or at least some discussion around the scholarly literature, is occurring outside of the scholarly literature. So we were interested in this. We had a lot of sort of previous experience with, dealing with stuff that sat slightly askew to the scholarly literature. So, for instance, for years we've been assigning DOIs to things like data software, working papers, and other things. We've got lots of members who publish sort of orthogonal professional literature, stuff like stuff out of IGOs and NGOs, the OECD, WHO. These are all members of ours. Increasingly, we've been working with organizations who deal with patents, because patents also cite the scholarly literature. And then what's happening now in these sort of referral logs that we're seeing is that we're seeing that a lot of stuff is coming through from entities we don't even recognize sometimes. new scholarly tools, scholarly collaboration tools, sometimes mainstream media, and then, of course, the darling of people who talk about our altmetrics is the stuff like the social media, Twitter, Facebook, blogs, Wikipedia. As far as I know, I don't think we've actually had a DOI come from Yo. I think that's probably because they're rather limited in what you can do with that. But the point is that this is actually becoming part of the scholarly conversation record. This is discussion around the scholarly literature. And it has been becoming increasingly clear to us that if we didn't at least provide some way of tracking this, we, at least internally even, would be negligent because we wouldn't be able to respond to the new ways in which people are needing to use DOIs and people are needing to be able to deploy them. Now, one thing I want to sort of emphasize from the start is one of the things we're not interested in is metrics. CrossRef does not want to get into the business of trying to create proxies for productivity or quality or anything like that. We are interested in how the infrastructure that we've developed and that all of our members use is being used, and we're interested in helping our members understand a little bit about how it's being used and whether that, if somebody else takes that and turns that into metrics, that's another matter, but this is certainly not something that we CrossRef are interested in. But we were interested in actually finding out how the stuff was being referred to. And so a few years ago, we realized that PLOS had developed this fantastic open source software for tracking activities around content on the web. And they were using it for building metrics tools, and some other people were installing it and using it for building metrics tools. And what this software did essentially was it would take the DOIs and the metadata for PLOS articles, and it would go out to various services like Twitter and Facebook and Wikipedia and others, and see if there was any mention of these things. And then it would pull it together and create a data set that you could then analyze and look at. And we thought that it would be kind of a cool experiment, and this is what my group is actually charged with doing, is experiments sometimes. We thought it would be kind of cool to load up a whole bunch of DOIs into it from our system, not just the DOIs from one publisher, and see what happened. And the answer fairly quickly was the whole thing fell over because it wasn't designed to deal with 70 million DOIs. It was designed to deal with hundreds of thousands of articles. But it was an interesting experiment nonetheless, and PLOS had reached out to us before, and we talked to them, and we worked on the code with them. They primarily worked on the code. We just complained. And we slowly started getting the code to actually work with a larger number of DOIs, and we were actually starting to be able to collect information from a lot of these different resources. And once we had something that we were fairly comfortable with, we made an announcement and said, hey, look, we've got this little experiment up. Are any of our members interested in this? If you are, we'd like to hear from you. And so one day I was sitting at a board meeting in Barcelona, and an email pinged into my inbox, and it was from Mark. And he said, yeah, we're kind of interested in this. A bunch of OASPA members have been talking about how we might be able to work together to look at this kind of data. We've got a lot of concerns about how this area is going at the moment. And each of us has kind of experimented a little bit, and we thought, well, maybe we could get together and experiment, but quite frankly, it might even make more sense if we did a broader experiment, and maybe CrossRef could help. And that really that delighted me when I got that email, because this is really one of the things that we keep trying to do in the industry, which is go out and find problems that all of our members have, or at least the majority of our members have, and to see if we can actually come up with some tool that allows us to address this problem without each publisher having to go off and do this. And one of the things that our skill is a lot of people enter this industry and they think, okay, well, we have to deal at most with maybe the handful of publishers that they can name off off of the top of their head. Those are usually the big ones, Springers, Elsevier's, Plosses, and so on and so forth. But if you actually look at the overall demographic of publishers, you realize that it is quite a bit bigger than this, and this is just our membership list. And you realize that if you were actually trying to go out and to speak to all of those publishers about this problem, you'd quickly face a problem. And that is that it would probably become impractical quickly. And this is where we come in. We can serve as a hub because we already have contacts with a lot of these publishers, and they already participate in the system with us, and we already have mechanisms that their production teams work with and so on. So again, when Mark came to us, we thought, wow, this is great. This is exactly how it should work. As an industry group says that they have a problem, and they say, maybe there's some technical element to it. Can we go to CrossRef and see what happens? And the problem is this, right, is that you've got on the list a very, very minified version of our membership list, 5,000 plus at the moment. And then you've got a sort of indeterminate list of all sorts of different sources where DOIs might be being discussed, might be being used, might be being shared, might be being bookmarked. Let's set aside what it is that people are doing with them, but they're being used in some way or another. And there are a few characteristics about these lists, but I want to just talk a little bit first about what happened. This group came together. Initially, it was 7 publishers, and they were from OWASPA, all from OWASPA. And of course, one of the things that we said is, well, this is a fantastic start, but we really need to know whether this is going to be of interest to a broader segment of our membership. And so we got in touch with some, of our contacts and so on and so forth. And lo and behold, I think almost instantly it grew from 7 to 17. And one of the other things that we did, and one of the things that CrossRef is increasingly interested in doing, is making sure that we had other stakeholders involved in this. So, because although we are a membership organization for publishers with a small p, right? Not all of our members are professional publishers. We increasingly are building infrastructure that funders and institutions and sometimes researchers are beginning to depend on increasingly. And so we're trying to figure out how to get their representation into a lot of our working groups so that we're building things that actually meet their needs as well. So we put together a group here that you'll see has got quite a few different stakeholders in it. And this was the group really almost from the first or maybe second meeting, and I'm looking to Mark, and he's not looking at me to nod and assure me that, yes, that was the case. When we first met, we identified a number of concerns that the entire group had. And I just want to go over them. First of all, how many people here recognize these logos, most of them? Right, okay, so one of the issues is that there was clearly already activity in this area. There are people, there are organizations who are building tools, metrics tools, that a lot of you might subscribe to and that you might use. And they're already in this space and they're working. And so one of the questions was, well, why were you interested in CrossRef, right? Because if the answer is that you just think, oh, well, maybe CrossRef will do it for free, that's probably not just a great answer for justifying something that we're doing. And so we identified a few things. One was that there seemed to be some practical problems. So a lot of the people in the group were saying, yes, we're working with some of these organizations, but we're also kind of interested in running our own systems, and we've been playing with running our own systems, and we've immediately run into a whole host of problems. Don't go through all the bullets because you'll bore yourself, but they're scalability problems, basic scalability problems. Like I showed you that list of sources that you might query, social media sites, other things. Well, that's always in flux. You don't know what new thing is coming up, what thing is going out of business, and somebody kind of needs to keep track of that, and that's difficult. If you are polling all of those platforms, and you've got 6 or 7 publishers all doing the same thing, or 6 and 7 third parties all doing the same thing, there's an awful lot of repeated work going on there. They're querying the same APIs, they're querying the same sources, they're querying the same data, and that seems quite inefficient. And there are all sorts of other things having to do with, negotiating terms and conditions with all of these parties, negotiating their APIs, doing all of that. So it's basically, it comes down to this kind of multi-bilateral agreement problem that CrossRef was originally founded to try and address, and that we talked about a little bit earlier. There were some other sort of more deeply philosophical issues that I think the group started out with, and that was that they were concerned that in the future, as they collect information about the research process, about how researchers interact with each other and with the literature, whether it's formal or informal, that the data that's collected in these contexts be open, that it be comparable. That is, that you be able to say, okay, well, there are two people building metrics out of this. How can we compare them? If they're using, if it's based on the same data, you might be able to do that. But if each is collecting data in a sort of opaque way, it's a lot harder to do that. They felt that the data had to be auditable. And they thought that this was particularly important as people were looking to some of this data as being the basis for perhaps future metrics or future mechanisms for measuring productivity. And then lastly, they were vaguely concerned that they wanted to make sure that this data was portable. That is, if you had been collecting information about the usage of DOIs in your journal, and that journal decided to move to another publisher or something like that, that you didn't suddenly lose all this historical information about usage and have it disappear. Because again, this stuff was becoming a bit part of the scholarly record. And if you were to sum it up, the biggest thing was that people in the group really were concerned that information about the research process itself should be treated with the same care and respect and concern for openness and transparency that we are advocating people use when talking about the data that is underlying the research that they're producing. It's critical for us to understand exactly how people are working together and so on and so forth. So we started out with a pretty lofty idea, which was that we thought we could usefully separate the gathering of events about DOIs, about where they were being used, and so on and so forth, from the value-added services that a lot of these other organizations were providing. And the kinds of things that I'm talking about here is that the organizations, the altmetrics organizations, are cleaning up the data, they're building analysis tools, they're building reporting tools, they're supplementing the data with other data, whether it's geolocation data or private sources of data. They're adding a lot of other functionality to it, right? But there was this idea that at least the underlying queries from the social media sites, from the other sites, could be an open resource so that it would be portable, auditable, and all of the things that we talked about before. So again, the thing to emphasize here is that what we were looking at in this experiment was not to try and supplant any of these organizations, but to create a sort of common pool of data that they could use in addition to perhaps other data that they had, and that we knew could be actually kept open and available. So again, we might serve as a hub for this kind of data. So the first thing we needed to do is actually conduct a pilot. And the issues that we faced were considerable. I mentioned earlier that when we first launched the software, one of the biggest issues that we had was just scalability. How do you get something that was designed to deal with few hundred thousand articles to scale up to dealing with 70 million? But there were also a bunch of use cases that we identified that kind of surprised us and that the software at the time didn't deal with. So, for instance, in addition to being able to want to have the software go out and poll resources, that is, repeatedly check Wikipedia to see if the DOI was mentioned, we realized that actually that's a really inefficient and it's a really inefficient way to do it. It's a necessary way to do it in the current world. But ultimately, it's not going to scale because you're going to have to go through polling all of these sources for all of these DOIs repeatedly, and eventually it gets to the point where it's like, I don't know whether it's true or not, but the story about painting the Golden Gate Bridge. Once you're done, you got to start again, and actually it gets so bad that you're not going to finish anytime soon, and your metrics are going to be, months late, and so on and so forth. The simple process of polling all of this information was formidable. So ultimately, we had to put in a mechanism that would allow people to push data to us. And similarly, we also discovered that there were probably going to be cases where, yes, it was absolutely fine for us to collect data and make it available in a common pool. But there were also some cases in which publishers wanted to collect data privately because it contained, for instance, perhaps personally identifying information that couldn't be put into a public pool. So, it could be demographic information about the users of the content and so on and so forth. So there were a number of use cases that we had to come up and that we had to actually work out and test. And we actually ran a live system for almost a year, in which we tested out some of these scenarios and made sure that we thought that we could actually meet the various use cases. And we even, and we effectively built out an architecture, not of all of which is complete yet, and I'll explain that, but we built out an architecture that we think will actually provide us with maximum flexibility for collecting this data and make this data available to everybody in a common pool. We even experimented with some stuff that we didn't think we were going to experiment with. So, for instance, I told you about this idea of seeing if we could reverse the process and get people to report data to us rather than us going and checking repeatedly with them to see if there was any new DOI activity. And fortunately, we had some great contacts, Daniel Meechan and others at Wikipedia, who put us in touch with Dario Tarabelli and some others at Wikimedia. And we talked to them about this. And the Wikimedia Foundation, Wikipedia in particular, is very interested in understanding how the Wikipedia interacts with the scholarly literature. And they were particularly interested in this when we revealed to them that in an analysis of our referral logs, that is, our logs indicating every time somebody clicks on a DOI, that the Wikipedia ranks conservatively as the 8th largest referrer of DOIs in the world. It's actually probably more like around the 5th largest referrer of DOIs in the world. So they were quite interested in this, and they were very excited by it. And we worked with them to build a tool that actually now pushes information to us. So right now, there's a site, if you go to CrossTech, you can find it, where we have a live stream of edits that are going on Wikipedias around the world. If somebody adds a DOI to a Wikipedia article, or critically, if someone removes a DOI from a Wikipedia article, we're immediately notified, and we have, at the moment, a demonstrator sort of site just showing that stream of data going by. And this was a very useful exercise because it really did show us that it was far more efficient to actually collect the information this way, and far more compelling because you were going to get this information almost in real time. And the Wikipedia worked with us, and it allowed us to figure out whether we would be able to scale this up and whether we would actually be able to build a system that could consume all this information and redistribute it to our members in an efficient way. The upshot of this pilot that ran for a year is that in July, we presented the report from the working group to the board, and the board said, yes, we want you to go ahead and we want you to turn this into a product next year. And this basically means there's still a lot to do. There's to begin with, up until about 2 weeks ago, we didn't have a director of product management, and they pointed out that maybe it would be a good idea for us to get one in for something this big. And so they've given us the go-ahead to actually turn this into a product. And so over the next few months, we're going to be working hard with our members, with other stakeholders, to get them involved and to find out some of the other things that they're going to want from this. And if you go to this URL here, you will see that, there's an announcement up on the CrossTech blog that was posted this morning about how this project is going forward. So this is kind of a very long and roundabout way of saying we need to do more of this. There are lots of different problems that we can probably only solve as a community. And a lot of us are chipping away at them in sort of isolation, thinking that we're going to solve some of these issues. So this precedent was almost, this activity that was sort of initiated by OASPA and Mark, to me, is almost a textbook example of good practice in this industry, where we see that there's a problem, we see that everybody's chipping away at it separately, we see that there's some commonality, and we come together and see if there's something that we can actually do together to solve the problem. And basically, I encourage you over the next few months, because it's going to take us some months to turn this into a production system, to either get in touch with me or probably more effectively to get in touch with Jennifer Lin, our new Director of Product Development. And if you are interested in keeping track of this and you don't want to talk to us for some reason, we've also provided you with a handy form so that you can continue to be antisocial, and you can just get emails every now and then telling you about how much progress we've made. But I'm looking forward to the next year, and I want to thank OASPA a lot for helping us formulate and push this forward. So thank you.